once again, thank you for coming. And today I just want to share a bit of experience on how to advertise on internet, especially when starting to advertise something new, because there's a lot of advice available that's focused on improving efficiency of advertising. But when you're just starting, you most often either need to understand how to break even at least, or make money with advertising a new product, or just to evaluate what the community feedback is, what's the feedback you're getting from target audience with regards to both product and the advertisement. So I'm going to talk a bit about how to select audience and what audiences can be used to target advertising online, how the performance can be measured, and how to make meaningful measurements in terms of to understanding and further segmenting the customers based on the advertising of how advertisement performs, and also how to use advertising to deepen and extend understanding of the customer, understanding, sort of expand marketing by doing advertising, because I found the amount of data that advertising and selling something on a market gives, it's just so much more and so high in quality compared to just market research when not actually offering to sell something. And that's not to say that's two different kinds of market research and you have to sort of to do both. But once you start selling, it gives real data who's buying what, and that data can be acquired and further segmented using digital advertising platforms. So I'm going to talk mostly on Facebook. Now, it's not really limited to Facebook, so it's going to be valid, well, obviously for Instagram because it's the same platform as Facebook, but it's also, everything I'm talking about would be applicable to LinkedIn and Google Ads and all other platforms that may be available. So the step one would be to define audience, and the way the audience should be defined for digital advertising, online advertising, is to use the segments that are available on the platforms you use. So usually that's age, sex, location, income, education, job title, or places of work. They're usually available. And many platforms would also have opportunity windows available for targeting, such as someone whose friend is having a birthday soon, or someone whose friend getting married, a lot of things like that. So just applying traditional sort of segmentation tactics from 24 steps, if you do them, usually you would already have the details that are required to target your advertisement on Facebook or on other digital platforms. Now, the downside of that is that while you could overlap that segments, those segments, they're not really that many available to them. So they only let you to target segments that probably cover tens of thousands of people. So if you're doing some niche product or considering some niche market to be a beachhead market, that's not really going to work that well. But you still can, even if you do an audience where perhaps one of 10 members of that audience is your target customer, that's already very good. It's already much better than just targeting by wide geographic or something like that. So, and the more precise you could be from going from the first 10 customers list to understanding how that defines your segment, the better result you would get. So that's one way to create an audience, and that's probably one of the best ways to do it. And it's necessary just to have a good chance of making money from your advertising. Now, there are several tools available to that. So Facebook has a brilliant tool called Audience Insights, and it's really visual. So we could actually try to do the shared browser feature, I think. Okay, so it's broken. But anyway, this is a very visual way to understand the audience, and it gives the ability to visualize, define your audience by interests or by sex and by other metrics, and then just see what traits that audiences has, and how it can be segmented further, or perhaps if there are any overlapping audiences. Now, the important thing is with Facebook, the ads manager, for whatever reason, has many more interests and just has different sets of interests than Audience Insights have. So while Audience Insights is great for initial look into how Facebook and other platforms segment people, the actually setting up advertisement, you would get slightly different lists and slightly different audience sizes and be more precise. The other thing I discovered is a list of that interests and their availability and how they called would be different depending in each language you use Ads Manager. So it looks like they try to be connected between countries and regions and languages, but it's not always the case. The other thing which probably everyone knows about is Google Keyword Planner. So Google Keyword Planner allows to estimate search amounts for the keywords. Now it has same downside, so it only really works when you have some sort of high frequency keywords, and you cannot really use it to estimate more niche queries if you're trying to sort of go towards low frequency or more better defined markets. But it has paid alternatives, and that paid alternatives may have some more insights into the size of the audience and what people are searching for and what they interested in. The other way that's possibly even more better is lookalike audiences. Sorry? Never mind. So lookalike audiences. So lookalike audiences is a great way. And the way they work, instead of trying to make all that segmentation from income and interests and everything else, what you could do is, if you have a list of the people large enough, and what large enough means is different across the platforms very widely. But if you have a list of people that's more than 10 customers, if you have like 1,000 or even so Facebook usually works on like 25 people, which is a big difference because Google Ads would require you to upload a list of 1,000 contacts. So once you have that contact, instead of you trying to understand what interests Facebook and Google categorize that people buy, you could just let the Facebook magic to do its thing. And it actually works pretty well. So you upload a list of contacts and certify that you have obtained that contacts in a legal way. And then it can get you 1 or 2 or 3% of the audience in a certain country that has closest interest to that particular contacts you uploaded. So if you already started just selling, if you already have a paying customer and you need to find more people like them, usually it's much more efficient to just upload your the list of contacts you have and start from that, rather than trying to define that audience manually by income and education and all that. However, having said that, you could still refine it further. So once you have lookalike audience, you could apply more filters. So if you know certain people would never be interested in that, you could narrow it down to the people who actually convert. Now, the next step here is to measure performance. So as soon as you start getting that clicks and you start getting leads and you start getting sales, what you want to do is to see who the people who convert. And there are 2 ways to do that. And one is manual. So just tracking who comes and just making sure you understand how each of the purchases and each of the leads, how is it connected to the original advertising. So you have to be able to track that all the way through, even if that conversion happens on like a different website in 2 months, you still have to find a way to connect that to original click. Only then if you have low volume, only then you would be able to tell where you get revenue, which one you get revenue from, and which not. So, and all that systems, Facebook Ads Manager and Google Ads Manager, they all have built-in tools to do that as well, assuming you send back the attribution data. And there are a few ways to do that. So one is to do online tracking. So Google calls it Google Tag, and Facebook calls it Facebook Pixel. So if conversions only happen online, then you could just use that, put a small JavaScript in the website that will be sending data back to those systems, and that hopefully should populate the reports. And I'll show examples a bit later. That will populate the reports, giving you information about who's buying and which of the adverts are working and which adverts don't. Now, the downside of that is you probably still, if you sort of have customers in tens or even just one by one, you still probably want to look them up online and try to improve your segmentation. Basically, go back to the segmentation stage of marketing and look up those people online and try to find out who they are, where they come from, why does they interest, what do they do. Because very often the people who actually convert, who actually buy in, what I found is they usually not quite the same people that you thought would be buying based on the original market research and the original hypothesis that were. So online advertising is a great way to refine that hypothesis and refine the audience you're targeting. So in addition to online tracking, there are two more ways available to get the data back to the advertising platforms, and also I could use Google Analytics, Mixpanel, all that sort of analytics tools to track your conversions as well. So one is many offline conversions. It's supported by Facebook, Google, and other major social networks. So that's where you could get a list of contacts who have converted and conversion values, if you have them, the amount they paid, and upload them. And very often they would be able to match that to people who click the advertising. Now, the benefit of that, it works very well when you're like even if that hasn't been multiple device conversions, so because they know that same person uses so many different devices, they would be able to map it across that devices. The downside is that mapping is not 100% reliable because people use different emails, people don't active on all social networks and all devices and so forth. And the third way is to automating that by doing an API integration where each of the purchases you just keep sending to each of the conversions, you keep first associate with the initial click, where that click came from, and then when it converts as a lead and as a paid conversion, send the details back to Google, back to Facebook, back to Google Analytics to be able to see them attributed. And I'm going to show a few examples of that. So there's been actually integration service I'm building for that particular API integration. So it's based on several proprietary integrations I'd done for earlier this year for my customers. But I figured that if it's repeatable there might be a bigger market for that. So I built a landing page before building the product and described in a very, it's sort of, if you look at that, it probably looks very obscure language, but it's how I felt about this. And I wanted to test if there's actual people who would be thinking the same way and would be willing to buy that. So I built a landing page and defined initial audience. So I went into Facebook Ads Manager and said, right, so I'm probably looking into people based in United States or United Kingdom, based on my previous customers. That really have any age, but I also, the way that landing page was built, it's quite technical. So I assume that's people who are interested in online advertising and also use web development. So I tried to do very weird interest. I tried to target people who listen to Gary Vaynerchuk and also interested in web development, which surprisingly actually looks, well, those two, not necessarily very large overlap between those two, even though it's 1 million, more than 1 million people like that. But I think the interest in Facebook, I found that the amount of people interested with Gary Vaynerchuk interest and amount of people with entrepreneurship interest are actually very similar. So I'm not sure how much it actually maps to a certain video blogger. However, I ended up having this very wide audience. And the next thing I started to look is started to pay towards the advertising and see how many would convert, or more precisely, how much money it would take me to get one conversion. I just, at that point, I needed to understand that the people are understanding what I wrote in landing page, and that correlates with what they need. And the landing page I made had a fairly complicated form, so with intrusive questions like what revenue your business have and how many conversions and things like that. So I knew that once I get a lead, that person probably had an interest in what I am offering. So this is what it took. With that wide audience that's not really interested in necessarily interested in data, and I'm trying to sell data integration services, so I'm not really having some generic content about digital advertising when I was doing this. So I had a reach of 1,300 people here, and on this screenshot it doesn't show the clicks, but I assume that would have been about like 50 or 100 clicks. That resulted in one lead. So first of all, I knew that instantly that audience, even the very wide audience I selected, it's been responding. I got one lead. That lead was qualified, and first of all, that gave me information to do to proceed further. The other thing that's important if you're setting up the campaigns is that you choose the correct conversion event. So what I mean is there are two ways to do advertising on Facebook and many other platforms. Is you could either choose to pay by clicks, or you could pay by sort of optimize your conversions, which could be clicks, leads, or sales. And it gives you a choice. So one thing I discovered with experience is you really have to have at least 50 per week, because the window it looks at your conversions is really small. So you probably need above 10 conversions each day. And if that doesn't happen, the way the targeting starts to work, it's if just randomly, if you normally have 3 sales and one day you don't have 3 sales, then it will just destroy your audience and will start showing advertising to entirely different audience because you didn't have sales to your main audience. So just be very, very mindful of that. So attribution. This is from a different project, and this is a screenshot from Google Analytics, how it works once you sort of start selling something. And this requires connection of the advertising, and that this has been done with the API connection I was talking about previously. So it's been looking into capturing information for each of the person who came to the website, which advert it came from, keeping the source, and then once it converted, and in this particular case, that's been, first of all, the amount of time it takes before conversion could have been quite long, but it also the fact about conversion, especially if you do online payments, and if you do online payments on a third-party website, what could happen is you have a paying customer who have paid, but closes the browser right after that. So you don't get the redirect back, and you cannot use like Facebook Pixel or Google Tag to track that transaction. So this is why this particular project required a backend API integration to be built to feed that offline conversions, which are really online payments, but they tracked as offline conversions because the payment confirmations are received offline, outside of the web. Basically, it's through internet, but outside of the web. And then the backend, the funnels that this company uses, it connects that transaction with original advertising and sends that connection back to Google Analytics and back to all that platforms. So it instantly shows what revenues are per each of the per each of the sources and campaigns, and how conversion rates are different, and so forth. The other thing you could do is if you look into Facebook Ads Manager or Google Analytics provides that as well. It's just not as deep as Facebook. Is you could try to do different breakdowns to see your performance. So, for example, coming back to the previous example I was talking about, just looking at age, it starts to show. Well, in this case, it doesn't actually show much difference. So we see that young people don't necessarily respond to this very well, but for the others, there's a fairly uniform conversion rate, considering amount of conversions we're looking at, right? So if we're looking at one click from 200 impressions, that could be one or could be two. So it's all around 1%, more or less. However, once we look into location, that starts to get more interesting. So certain states might have a click-through rate of several percent, even at fairly low impression count. It's instantly visible. So you probably normally would expect about 1 in 30 people, as a sort of rule of thumb, you would expect 1 of 30 people you interact with, either by email, by online ads, that they somehow show you their interests. In case if your audience and your advertising, if it makes sense, you would usually have at least 1 of 30 coming back to you. So even though those numbers are very small, they still show that proof that this actually works. But the interesting thing is Texas and some other states, that just wasn't working. There's been 0 interactions despite almost 100 impressions. So, and I had a full table somewhere, but you could instantly see the differences, that it would be different even at that very, very wide audience that's been set up initially. People in different states already start to respond differently to that advertising, but there's no same, the response by age and by sex is uniform. So you can't use age and sex to target that further, but you could use this data to understand that there might be certain locations within the country where people are responding better to that offering that you have. And so to recap that, so first of all, the great way to start online advertising is to collect the data, segment customers, and get that list of first 10 customers, and define a segment based on that customer persona. The second is get the first leads and purchases, either by online advertising or not, because once you have that, you could send that and create lookalike audience based on the purchases, which would usually work much better than any sort of segmentation you could do manually. And the third step would be to send that transactions back to all platforms used for advertising, send it back to Facebook ads, Google ads, Google Analytics, so you could see who's converting. And also you could let that platforms use it to automatically refine that audience. So for example, if there are enough conversions, then instead of reaching that entire audience, if you have a small budget, you could say, Facebook, right, so I have this small tiny budget of $30 a day or something like that, and figure out of that million who you want to show the adverts so that they convert better. But to do that, you should be able to send the conversions back to the platform, and then it just magically improves it 5 times better ROI usually if the data are being sent back to,
I have a question
to the advertising platforms.
On the lookalike, you had a page just now.
Thank you for listening, and
Facebook,
I would love to answer
X number of lookalikes is usually statistically significant enough for them to kind of find the right audience. What was that number again?
Go ahead.
Yes. Got it.
25.
So that's what they started to do.
25 people, yeah.
This page, right? You're referring to. Yes, so that's they sort of doing that because they try to pretend they protect privacy of their customers. And it used to be you could like put a list of your 2 friends and show advertising to your 2 friends. Now all major platforms not doing this anymore. So they want to kind of anonymize their audience once when they're doing that lookalike audience. So and that threshold is different. And Facebook, it worked for me. I don't think they publicize the exact number. But if you upload, I uploaded like 25 contacts and it worked. Like you cannot set up an advertising targets on 25 people. You cannot do that. But you can ask Facebook, find something in common between that 25 people and show advertising to that 1% of US population that has something in, or any, I mean, you could choose any country as long as that people from the same country, and show the advertising to the people who are similar to them.
Yeah, no,
and Google Ads can do the same. The only difference, they require you to have 1,000 matches with their database. Does that answer the question or not quite?
How much do you think is the minimum? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Go ahead, Pilar.
Okay, I think there is a delay. I'm just curious, like how much do you recommend us to start? Like how much is the budget for an initial campaign for testing the segmentation?
So I wouldn't define a budget as such because it's always different. Because depending on the audience you're targeting, you might have very large cost per click or very low cost per click. And also you could define, especially when you're just starting, you could define a budget that's sort of smaller and you would be maybe reaching 1% if you define the audience, but the cheapest percent if you define the audience. So really the number you have to look at is how many conversions you're getting. So because like when you look at numbers like that, it doesn't really meaningful, right? So if you have say, and I went here on purpose to show the deficiencies, like how many you have to have, right? So if we do 2,000 impressions and well, it's in rubles, so it's like $50 here. So we know that it's been $50 spent to do 200 impressions and get 1 click. Now, maybe that's not the perfect, like not you can't really make meaningful conclusion because it's 1 out of 200. So it might be 1%, might be 0.5%, might be 3 or 4%. So what you need to do is when you're doing like the sort of overall thing is you have to get any meaningful number that you have. And in this case, I was testing like 1 conversion, and I was aiming to have 1 out of 30 as a rule of thumb. So if you have 100 impressions, you expect at least some clicks. If you have 100 clicks, you expect to get at least 1 conversion or 2 conversions.
Okay, thank you.
So if it's like 3% times 3%, that means you probably have to reach about 1,000 or 2,000 people with your advertising before you know, because if you have a conversion rate to click in order of 3% and then conversion into a lead in order of 3%, and if you're looking for actual sales, that kind of multiplies to 10x because you're not 10x, like 5x, because the actual conversion of lead to
all right.
To purchase would be lower.
I had a really very basic question, which because my knowledge of this topic is very limited. I was just wondering, like, when you were speaking about going into audience insight, how do you actually get there from? And does that only work if you have a company page, or does it even work with your own profile to look at audience insight?
No, audience insights is different, right? So to create an ad in the to create an advertising in the ads manager, you have to set up a page. You don't have to complete it. You don't have to have a real company to do that, but you have to go.
So it has to be a page, right? It has to be a page versus a.
It has to be a page to do that in Ads Manager, but in Audience Insights, so it usually works. Let me try it from my browser. I wonder if it's browser difference or something else. So I'll share a link to chat, and I think I can share.
Is this what you're looking for, this page?
So direct link. And well, not this page, but actual. Wait, share my window again. Just share my browser. Right. So this, hopefully you see it now. This is the Audience Insights. What you could do just starts from like everyone in a certain country, right? So it has whatever, like 2 million in the United States of America, and that's how it's distributed, and that's how they relate it. Now you could put something into interest. I don't think I could actually put like MIT bootcamp, and that's a great example of what I was talking about, right? So you wouldn't be able to find MIT bootcamp here because it's just too small for Facebook to display to you here. But funnily enough, like coding, and I think entrepreneurship bootcamp won't be. It won't be here. That would be like coding bootcamp. And all right, so let's try to put MIT as an interest. So this instantly refined your audience to only show you the people who are somehow Facebook teams being interested in MIT. Now that's 1 million people in the United States, what they're saying. And you could further refine that by either people connected to your pages, and that's also what they call advanced. So you could filter by language, filter by relationship status, filter by education, filter by work, and so forth. So I don't know, like Mary, it would be different. Yeah, that's not that much different, but I mean, you could see, right? So people in 25 to 34, that's like this amount. But if you only looking at people who are married, then suddenly your audience becomes twice smaller, and you see that's how they distribute it. And that distribution doesn't stop here. The reason why this tool is amazing, it gets you so many information about those people who are interested in MIT. What else they're interested in? What sort of watering holes, right? So they listen to John Oliver and Bill Maher, right? They want to vote for Bernie Sanders, and that sounds very stereotypical, and it is very stereotypical, but it suddenly gives you that precise stereotypes about audiences. And you also know, right, so they overlap hugely with people interested in MIT technology and also EDX. And Smithsonian Magazine, for example, that's something maybe less obvious. And you could tell where they're based, right? I mean, we know it's going to be Massachusetts mostly, but this, again, it's very precise. But you also can find what languages people speak apart from English, right? So they speak UK English, for example, 3%. And activity, well, that's really not, I didn't really find that YouTube being that useful, but it could sort of tell also what that audience you're considering, if they're using iPhones or if they use computers. But for example, what they don't have here really kind of creepy demographics that is available. Okay, well, that's funny. They have politics here, right? So you could see how people are different. People who are interested in MIT and interested in conservative, right? So they don't listen to John Oliver anymore. They interested in something entirely different. So you could quickly be able to dissect that audience, and the ads manager would have more. So the ads manager would also have income and would have things like when did they get married and when they.
What is a good size of the audience?
A lot of things like that.
To launch an ad. Is it like 1 million too much, or is it like the perfect size, or you have any suggestion there?
I think it depends what you're doing. Well, so first of all, Facebook would have that hint to you which audience size they think is good. So they would have that meter saying it's too large or too small. And you could use that as a ballpark. It doesn't really matter. What you want to do is to be as precise as possible. But I mean, there's also an opinion I heard from people who do that professionally that if you select larger audience, it would be able and set up automated targeting based on conversions, it would be able to find a cheaper audience than if you pre-select a narrow audience. I didn't really find that being the case in the businesses I worked with, but it might be. So
I have a question
overall,
on your landing page comment
just your understanding of customer, the better you could translate it.
Your landing early in the presentation. So setting up a landing page, and so you can do some really interesting experiments, right? This whole thing about why before you build a product, you can do an experiment by setting up a landing page with a sign up list, for example, and then buying maybe $50 worth of ads and seeing who signs up, and then you can build your lead list essentially. In that case, have you found any best practices on the landing page itself? Whether it's the easiest is just harvest email. So it'll be one field, enter your email, and that's it. Any thoughts there?
So I did, let me show you. It should work now. So I did the opposite here. So I asked people for their monthly revenue and website traffic volume, which was intentionally very, very invasive, because I wanted to use that page to qualify that instead of just getting leads and people who leave their emails, to see people who been interested enough from reading the above of that page to disclose details about their business, which I
basically
assume it to be a good indication of how interested they are in the product, stopping short of buying the product.
So the exchange is, if you sign up, we're going to give you some trials. Yep.
Right above the phone. Well, yeah, it's a bit out of date now. Yes, correct. So this, the rest of the pages talks about that in general, sort of what this is that you could use instead of sort of building your own API.
So you do see a correlation in terms of
use product to do that.
And so in this case, you have a few more fields just to
spoke about
filter the target
having
more.
That API
but I think it also, I wonder if this is accurate,
being able to
if you see this,
market,
but it also sort of filters for potential customers who find that this solves a big pain point, right? So meaning that if you actually just have an email field, you might actually end up having people who are who have less of a product market fit signing up. Do you find that being true?
Well, I haven't tested that on landing page. I did test it in the general sales process in my business, and I found that. So I tried to do what people kind of write in books and blog articles about selling better, and I found that really pursuing customers not necessarily a good tactic, because it really puts into your pipeline more customers who are not that interested, and you end up having relationships that not as good as it might be otherwise when the customers have more interest and you have customers who are not as committed to use your product, and perhaps they have a problem, but it's not as painful. Like when you do proper marketing by the book, that you start getting in your pipeline a lot of customers that you probably don't want into your pipeline. But that also depends what your goal is. Is your goal to get profitable unit economy, or you have like revenue goals to meet? And a lot of advice about online advertising is the same as well, because it's written by and for people who manage, I presume, multi-million-dollar budgets, and they have funding, and they need to spend that funding to get profitable customers, and they don't really care if that profitable customers, if it drops the margin from 30% to 1%, as long as that's profitable customers and they spend the budget and they get good results. So it depends on your goal, I guess, to answer your question, whether you need looking for customers who require less service from the sales and support, and provide a larger revenue, or if you're looking to have as many customers as possible at the moment.